Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome back at the Felix Meritus. Stephen Mays has worked with photography, art and journalism for more than 25 years. He's currently the managing director of VII Photo agency. While director of Network Photographers, a leading independent reportage agency by that time, Stephen chaired the World Press Photo competition and curated several photographic exhibitions, including Positive Lives, which continues to tour in 4 different continents. Stephen went on to develop creative strategies for major commercial agencies, working as a group creative director of Getty Images, CEO of Photonica, and Chief Operational Officer for ImageSource. As a creative director of iStorm, Mays worked with many contemporary artists, including Damien Hirst and Jeff Koons. And as director of the Image Archive at Art and Commerce, he represented Stephen Meisel, Ellen van Unwerth, and Terence Simon, and many, many others. He has written and broadcast extensively on the ethics and realities of photographic practice. And during all those years, Stephen stayed to be a great friend of World Press Photo, an ambassador, and one of the best you can think of. Besides his more practical involvement, like teaching at the Joop Swart Masterclass and participating in several debates, he was, as an editor, very, very instrumental in our 40th anniversary publication, This Critical Mirror. Stephen has always been very, very generous in sharing his thoughts and observations, and even put together a small essay in 2002 called Press Photography in the New Millennium. It was this commitment, together with his impressive professional career, combined with his British behavior, that made him the ideal successor of Adrian Monshauer, our previous jury secretary. I would kindly invite you, Stephen, to come to the stage and give us your take on 6 years of World Press Photo judging.
Very British behaviour. I hope it doesn't mean I was drunk the whole time rolling around the streets. Maybe I was. Well, thank you, Michiel. That past 5 minutes makes my job easier. During the long hours of judging this year, 2009, I counted them actually. There's 115 hours of screen time across 2 weeks. And if you actually parse that out, that's just shy of 5 consecutive days. We were sitting looking at images. A word kept springing into my mind, and it just kept going. It was romantic. The word romantic just kept popping up. Like a bad song, you know when you get a bad song in your head and you just can't shake it out? This word romantic just kept cropping up. I thought, what is that word doing in my head? I don't really quite understand. So we're looking at all this amazing journalism. And so I started with the dictionary. The dictionary definition I found of romantic is marked by emotional appeal to what is heroic, adventurous, remote, mysterious, or idealized. And that is the Merriam-Webster dictionary. And thinking about it, I found that it wasn't a random thought at all. There was actually a real rationale behind that word being in my head. Certainly as it applies to the process, the whole process of actually judging this competition, it certainly fits the category when you think about it. Working with these juries is definitely an adventure. They're a strong-minded bunch. They're all themselves set out for an adventure at the World Press Photo. So dealing with 13 jurors across the period of 15 days, some very strong opinions, very strong views, and somewhat eccentric behaviors at times, is an adventure. It's definitely mysterious. I mean, this whole process of how does one start with 96,000 images and produce this one single shot which represents the world of last year. It's a little mysterious. And sitting in our darkened room for 15 days, protected from the outside world by the assiduous staff of the World Press Photo, is definitely remote. But more than that, the pictures themselves evoke the word romantic. Hour after hour, looking at the infinite variety of the world, mediated filtered, compressed to fit the requirements of the world's press, left me overwhelmed with the impression of romantic. So much of the work I found was marked by emotional appeal to what is heroic, adventurous, remote, mysterious, and idealized. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on as we go through all this. So, I just add one thing to the introduction which Michiel gave me, is amongst all this other mongrel background that I have behind me, I am also a hobby photographer. And so, in order to brighten up these 40 minutes while I'm talking, I'm going to actually show a selection of a couple of hundred images which I've snapped over these last 6 years at the World Press Photo. This is, in fact, my little photo diary, which is somewhat audacious, I have to admit, in front of this audience, of winners. And I would ask you to look on them indulgently as a family album. Or, more cynically, it occurred to me, you could look on it as an editor's revenge. Here come 220 badly edited pictures right back at you. So we can start showing the show. In this review, I want to share some insights into the judging process and what this experience has taught me about photographers, the media, and indeed the world in general. And I think it's fitting to start with a tribute to the World Press Photo and their amazing process. That I've been simply dazzled by the efficiency of the organization and the efficiency of the process that lies behind it. And just as one little taster, we'll talk more about that, I'll talk more about that as I go on, but just as one little taster, when I called the office and said, can you tell me how many photographs I looked at over the last 6 years in the World Press Photo? It took them about a minute to come back with the answer, which is 470,214. Amazing. And I think what that little parable says is that, while we're all impressed by the volumes that the World Press processes through this system, every picture counts. And I have absolute faith that that number is accurate to the last detail. It's a very, very impressive process. And it starts with a mission. The World Press mission is to encourage high professional standards in photojournalism and to promote a free and unrestricted exchange of information. And Job Schwartz's vision is manifest to this day in the competition, the exhibition, which I'm sure you know, travels to nearly 100 different venues every year in 50 different countries, and it's an astonishing exercise in disseminating this vision out to the world. More recently, in the books that produced, the education programs, and increasingly innovative projects. And we'll be seeing over the coming days and weeks more announcements from the World Press about really exciting stuff happening. It's worth noting, I think, that the World Press has steered a very careful course over these 50, 55 years as a reflection of the industry rather than a driver. And in the process of setting standards and trying to establish thresholds and benchmarks, it's never been the organization's aspiration to impose those thresholds. Classically, the debate comes up almost annually at this point about standards around digital imaging, what is considered manipulated and what is not. And the World Press has been very, very careful in this whole debate about not trying to set itself up as a leader in unknown territories, but to reflect what is actually happening in the media. In the process, the competition has long fascinated me as a reflection of the media. And this, to me, is one of the amazing strengths of the whole process. That in the process of evaluating photographs, what actually comes out the end of it is indeed a reflection of the world's media. It's not just a reflection of the world's photography. It's a reflection of how the media is processing photography. Who these photographers are, they're all professional photographers, of course. They're all people with credentials who are, to some extent, earning a living from photography. So they're the people who submit. Over this year, over 5,000 submissions, 5,000 individual submissions. These are people who are deeply engaged with the media around the world. And it tells me every year when I look at the yearbook and the exhibition, it tells me a little bit about how the media has moved in the last year. And looking back through the yearbooks over the last 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, it's an astonishing document. To most in this room, as photographers, the competition has other meanings. It's about recognition, validation, career enhancement. It's another vehicle to disseminate information. It's also a social network. I think we can see that particularly here. For some, is I guess, a cash prize and a trip to Amsterdam. But for most, I think it's an opportunity to learn and see the work of others. And I think most photographers look very carefully at the results to see what is happening. And therefore, as an informational process, even amongst professionals, I think it stands very high in our profession. To the juries, the competition is an opportunity to effect change. It's an opportunity to see the world's best work. It's an opportunity to connect with peers, to learn and to educate, of course. And, of course, an element of recognition. And to the audience, yet another constituency, it's all about the fascination with the photographic image. And, of course, it's a testament. The numbers of people that see this competition, see these images online, the responses it gets when the awards are announced, just amazing. The volumes that turn out to see the shows in all these different countries demonstrates a very real, very live fascination with this image. The audience wants to be amazed. They want to learn. To some extent, they want a validation of their worldview. They're looking at the photographs which confirm to them how they see the world. And it's also a political phenomenon. Every year, people make comments, ask questions, critique based on the political content of the imagery. So all these different areas are swimming together through this competition. And yet the competition has a momentum all of its own, apparently resistant to influence from any one of these constituencies. And it's quite amazing how even when the World Press executive has made really vigorous attempts to develop the competition by reshaping the categories or by actively lobbying photographers or editors to send in new styles of work, and of course by adjusting the profile of the jury. It's quite amazing how resistant the competition is to forced change. All these adjustments have an effect. Every individual who contributes a photograph has an effect. Every juror placing a vote has an effect. But somehow the competition overall maintains an integrity which is all its own. From which I conclude it's really a cultural process. There's something larger at work. No single individual can really shape this, change it, or move it. But together, as we're all moving in a direction, the process does change. And it's interesting how within each year there's an amazing consistency of styles and of approaches. And even within each decade there's a consistency. The World Press, this momentum that it has reflects a very particular view of the world, a very particular way of photography. But it's interesting that does move. And when you look at the decades, if you look at old yearbooks, there's a marked difference between what the World Press reflects in 1950s, 1970s, 1990s. Again, sort of feeding my idea that this is a reflection of the media, that it's internally consistent and yet very responsive to what's happening out in the outside world. I wonder now, though, if that's changing a little bit. I think that the crisis in the news media and print media over the last few years now really reaching boiling point. I wonder if that's changed the outlook somewhat. And I have this sneaking suspicion that for many photographers, the competition isn't so much reflecting the media as it is anymore, but reflecting the media as we wish it was. And in looking at these 470,214 images over the last 6 years, I asked myself, how many of these pictures were really, truly published in a paid-for context? And a lot were, of course, but I think an awful lot weren't. And again, that brings me back to this notion that somehow photojournalism, at this point, and I'm speaking very generically, I'm not here talking about individuals or prize winners, but just generally from this milieu of 500,000 pictures that I've looked at, there's a strong tendency for photojournalism, I think, to be more romantic just to do a repeat of the definition, marked by an emotional appeal to what is heroic, adventurous, remote, mysterious, or idealized. And that certainly describes a huge amount of the work that I've seen coming in. And it's a little depressing in a way. I'm left with a feeling from looking at this extraordinarily big sample of what the world's photojournalists are putting out, is the photojournalist is trying, rather than reinventing itself as time goes forward, is actually copying itself. And we certainly see that in the competition in very obvious ways. You will notice that every time there's a winner or a new style or a new approach is reflected in a winning image, the following year the jury sees 10, 20, 30 different interpretations of that theme, sometimes more. It's quite amazing. So there's a literal copying process which goes on. But more than that, there's a mindset, I find, which has sunk over photojournalists as a whole. Again, I'm not talking about the exceptions, but as a whole, looking at this great sea of images, that out of that infinity of human experience, all the things which are happening out there in the world, every second of every day, every year, it's compressed into a remarkably short subject list for photojournalists. And this year, of the 96,000 images that were submitted, I think I probably could have written the subject lines on a single sheet of paper. Tremendous amount of repetition of photographers going to the same places, same spots, same ideas. And I could even distill it down even more to 3 lines, which is essentially the dispossessed and the powerless, the exotic, and anywhere but home. And I find it a little depressing, to be honest. And it's one of the things that makes the winning work shine so often, is people who've taken a different point of view, who've had the courage to step aside and think about the world differently and think about how they represent it differently. By the way, I would say one of the major exceptions this year, of course, was the American election, which was actually quite powerful in the home of so many of the photographers in North America. It's a very general view. It's a very blurred impression, and of course there are many exceptions. But I have to tell you that representations of hospitals and the sick, and especially mental hospitals, the afflicted, the poor, the injured, they're photographed way in excess of their actual numbers or the actual what goes on in the world. And I have a feeling, by the way, that there are as many photographers in the Russian house in Kabul as there are drug users. As one juror said this year, 90% of the pictures are about 10% of the world. And I think that it's a real challenge to all of us working in this industry, is how to move that on, how to expand our vision. Overrepresented commercial sex. Endless representations of commercial sex, meaning prostitution or various forms thereof. Suffering black folk. It's amazing how representations of black people is hugely in Africa and in a very problematized view of Africa. Muslim women in veils. Same-sex couples kissing and holding hands. Underrepresented, the middle class, almost absent. It's quite amazing. Affluent drug users, meaning drug users with power and money and control over their lives. Strangely underrepresented. Real sex, personal sex, is hardly there at all. And of course, black culture in its widest sense around the world, and vision of black life outside of Africa, I find are huge gaps. And at the end of the day, that leaves me feeling, what is journalism if it doesn't inform us? If it merely repeats and affirms what we already know? And of course, part of that is client-driven. We are all working commercially, we're trying to earn a living. And therefore, of course, people assigning us have a huge sway on that. But it's also part of the phenomenon of the competition. And it comes back to this thing of, I do get a sense of a lot of people shooting just for competition. As the opportunity to publish on printed paper goes down, competitions come up as an opportunity to distribute work. And characteristics that people often associate with the World Best Photo is violence. And it's amazing, every year people walk away from the exhibition feeling quite roughened, quite brutalized by what they've seen. And the overall impression is of a very violent world. And so this year, I did a count, and there are 376 award-winning images. And what's interesting is that only 25% of those represent situations of duress. I don't mean violence in that sense, but of people in unhappy situations, including, for example, a mother dealing with her autistic kids. Those situations of real emotional pressure and stress is only 25% of the whole show. And only 7% of all those winning images is actual injury, blood and death. And I take from that another message about the power of photography. The fact that people can look at just 7% of the winning images and walk away with the impression that the whole show is about violence tells you something about the power of this medium we work in. An astonishing power to still, in this day and age, to shock and to make an impression on people. So often people walk away vaguely remembering the animal eyes and the polar bears and the clowns and some of the amazing stuff, the upbeat stuff that's there. And what fills their heads is the horror, the unimaginable horrors, which are occasionally depicted. Somehow, I wonder if the structure of the exhibition, the competition itself, contributes a little to the process. It's something which is discussed endlessly and very intelligently by the organisation. But simple little things like category definitions such as daily life intrigues me. Because in some ways, the definition of daily life is strangely 20th century in my mind. That when in these days, we're actually dealing with lifestyle. When you actually look at what the newspapers and what the sections are called, there isn't really a section of daily life, but yet lifestyle as an alternative is very present. And I always imagine somehow that daily life somehow belongs to other people, and lifestyle is about people like us. And maybe that's me being a little cynical, but I just sort of wonder if these little subtle cues that are built into the structure and the fabric of competition may somehow influence it. But as one juror said in 2006, and you notice I'm not using names, this is one of our rules, is that we do not discuss individual comments or attribute individual comments. But as one juror commented in 2006, you don't always have to be brave with your balls, you have to be courageous with your brain. And I think that's a really, really important message. A message which, of course, many people in this room have learned as prize winners. You've all done extraordinary stuff. But it means, just to emphasize, it's important to take innovative risk as well as physical risk. And I'm very drawn to going back to Cappa's famous dictum, if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough. And in this instance, I think I'm talking about an emotional closeness. And I'm very careful there to make a distinction. When I talk about emotional closeness, I'm not talking about a sentimental display of warmth. I mean a real and genuine interest in what is being photographed. And it comes back to this, what I see as a very romantic industry, is that people are photographing what they think they ought to photograph, or they're expected to photograph. It's a kind of formulaic representation, both in choice of subjects and the choice in manner in which people photograph. And I think that one of my campaigns is to encourage people to photograph what actually really, really intrigues them. And I think in a lot of instances that's actually somewhat different from what people do photograph. I think what's lacking a huge amount in contemporary photojournalism is work that is really intimate, work that is real, work that is personal. And of course, again, I'm talking about generalities. There are many exceptions to that, but as a general theme of seeing 500,000 pictures in this context, I don't see much of the truly personal stuff. And every year, the jury, faced with this onslaught of material, attempts to set a standard. And it's different every year. It's one of the great, great joys of sitting in the chair I occupy, the secretary occupies, is watching as the juries come and change and reshape, and how they take this tool and do different things with it. Some opt for very traditional values, the bedrock of our profession. Others choose to push the envelope a little bit. the intriguing things about the whole process is it's pretty unpredictable, that even knowing many of the individual characters who are involved in the profession, when you actually put them in a room together, switch out the light, and leave them there for 5 days, strange things happen. The jury develops a worldview of its own. It develops a set of reference points from its discussions, from its observations, which become inward-looking and self-referential. And I would hasten to add, the jury is never wrong. And I think it's important to realise that while two juries would choose completely different sets of winners, it is very much a matter of taste, and that doesn't make it wrong. In the same way that two photographers covering one incident will come out with two different interpretations of what they saw, it doesn't make either of them wrong. So it's not a matter of right or wrong, it's a matter of these little microcultures which emerge. And that does explain why at the end of the process, when we rip down the blackout blinds and throw daylight to our blinking eyes for the first time, and the world looks at the selections, and the question is always, what? Every year, it's quite remarkable. And it doesn't matter whether an iconic image is chosen, whether a descriptive image is chosen. The kinds of questions which come back are always the same. And I think it's really, really important, just in terms of understanding the process, to understand that this is a statement from the jury. It's a statement of their worldview. It isn't literally the description of the world. They're not editing a magazine, they're not putting together a coherent editorial program that describes the year. They're describing how the world looks to them. It's a very, very personal choice. And as the role of the secretary in all of this, it's great. It's like being a grandparent. You have all the joy of the process, but without any real responsibility, because you don't have to raise your hand or make a decision about any of the pictures. I see the role as being very much like the pilot of a boat, actually. I'm a guest in the process, invited on board to guide the jury through to a destination of their choice. They're kind of clear where they want to get to. And that's not my job. It's not my job to tell the jury how to get there. Not why to get there or where they want to get to. It's how to get there. My job is to help them avoid the hidden perils, the undercurrents, the surprise attacks, the hidden sharks. So my advice to Daphne Ongley, taking over from me, would actually be the very same advice that I took from Adrian Monsau when I took over, which is take a real pride in the process. That's what the secretary does. But do try to distance yourself from the actual choices of the jury. And I have to say that's in my first few years of doing this, was one of the most stressful elements. Because I do have opinions, they're quite strong. And that temptation to go, you fools, is overwhelming. At one point, I fantasized about having a little series of signs where I just flip up on my desk and vote yes, vote no. But I wasn't allowed. So getting to the point, how do you actually win the World Press Photo? I think I'm going to talk about 3 rules, of which number 1 I think is really the most important. And the first rule is to enter. And it sounds crass and it sounds stupid, but there's not much more to it than that. Assuming that your pictures are good, assuming that you're proud of them, don't try to anticipate the jury and their moods or how they're going to evaluate their work. The way a jury responds to images is shaped by factors which are so far beyond the control of a photographer at the point of submission. It's, how the pictures are viewed will be influenced by what was seen immediately before them, by the time of day or the time of night, the temperature in the room, what was said over breakfast. All these things fold into this whole process of evaluating pictures. And out of that, I think it's true to say it's a pretty random process. It's not random in the sense that juries make crazy decisions. They don't. They're always following a rationale. There's a process behind this. But what that rationale is, as I said earlier, is very personal to that jury. It's basically built by that jury during that course of those 5 days alone in the dark. Having said that, I would just refer anecdotally to one of Adrian's comments when he was Summarising his observations in 2003 as I am now, he included a statistical analysis of Premier Award winners. And he pointed out that at the end of the day, your best chance of winning is if you're American, male, white, shooting black and white. So, there are some standards. Sorry, Tony, I'm teasing. Rule number 2, bad pictures don't win. And while I'm talking about the eccentricities or the strangeness and the vagaries of a jury and how they form their worldview, it's pretty certain in my experience that whatever discussions there might be about the winning pictures, they're always about good pictures. It's just which good picture. This good picture or that good picture. But bad pictures in the main don't win prizes. And I would really urge anyone entering just to think about the good pictures. Again, don't try to second guess the jury, where they're going to be, what their mindset is. Just think about what's good, what's strong, what is your worldview, what are you saying, what are you contributing? And if you were to win a picture, what does that contribute to our world knowledge? And the third rule isn't really a rule, but is just a general word of advice, and that's to get published. And it's quite amazing how, I'm endlessly impressed by the juries, how in the midst of this 115 hours of looking at pictures, they will pull out unrecognized, unknown images, photographers who are just attempting, hitting the market for the first time. I mean, they pay extraordinary attention and amazingly professional, diligent attention to everything. But there's no doubt about it that being a little familiar does sensitize the jury. It's worth pointing out that it's an anonymous process, and in the main, the jurors don't know who they're voting for. And all sorts of ironies come around in this process. Some jurors actually know the photographer and can identify it, but it's very, very rare for the whole jury to recognize the photographer. More amusingly, it happens every year, is that a juror thinks they know who the photographer is. And very often they don't. And so they're making assumptions and judgments based on who they believe made the pictures. And surprisingly often, it's somebody else. But the upshot, I would say, is that being published, being somehow implanted in somebody's brain, doesn't mean that they're recognizing the picture in the sense of being able to identify a strapline up the side of the picture or anything like that, but just being sensitized. So getting your work seen is, I would say, is a really important part of just keeping your pictures in the running for longer. But it's not definitely a winning strategy, but it helps. I want to talk a little bit about the process itself, because it's fascinating. I mean, it's fascinating to me. 96,000 images in 2009. Amazingly, every image is processed between the 15th of January and the 30th of January when the jury arrived. 96,000 images, all coded, checked, to an astonishing degree of detail. They look at the metadata, meaning the staff and the interns who called VII Photo, they look at the metadata, they interrogate the files, they sort them, they of course make sure they're unidentifiable by any names or any other evidence in the picture itself. And within that 2 weeks it's all done. The jury arrives on the 30th or thereabouts, the end of January, and from there on in they just look at pictures. And it's an astonishing experience. And it's amazing how plainly as photographers, you're up closer, you're in deeper, you're in the environment, you can smell the smells, you're getting wet, you're getting all the horrors and difficulties of actually shooting in the field. It's very intense. And I just want to point out there's an astonishing intensity at the other end of it. Not just to look at a picture, but to look at 96,000 pictures in 115 hours of screen time. It's an amazing, that's, as I say, 4.8 days. With your eyes pinned open, being thrown around the world from one frame to the next, is an astonishingly intense experience, and one which I have lost sleep over at night. There are times when you see things which are really better not seen, and you see a lot of them. And in this amusing, it's extraordinary juxtapositions where you're going from the crazy happy to the crazy bad, and your emotions, if you remain at all sensitive, and of course you have to, if you're judging these things, is grueling. I mean, it can take you open. I mean, it's something you can do for an hour, something maybe you can do for 2 hours, 3 hours, but doing it for 8 hours, 10 hours a day, sometimes longer, is an astonishingly intense experience. By the way, 115 hours, 96,000 images, that meant that this year, every image had an average of 4.5 seconds look time from the jury, which is really amazing when you think about it. 4.5 seconds is a long time. It doesn't mean a lot of pictures had a lot less, and as pictures go through the process, they get more and more time, but on an average, 4.5 seconds per picture is another really impressive thing about the process, to be able to accommodate that volume that intelligently. And the rules and the categories which have been put in place around all this are really clever. And they're clever because they offer a structure, and the structure is all about offering a mechanism to open the opportunities for the images. It's all about the image. The whole process is there to assist great imagery to survive, to live, to float through the process. So that, the categories that are chosen are very flexible. Many of you will have had experiences of images entered in one category emerging in a completely different category. The jury plays with this as a means of allowing the best pictures to survive and to live through the process. Having said which, the rules are rigid. There comes a certain point where the jury has to stop playing and has to observe certain rules. So it's like it's allowing as much movement and as much leeway as possible, but knowing where to call a halt, so that the rules are fairly observed for all the photographers or the entrants. It's surprisingly resistant to sabotage. Every year, not every year, several years, a juror will arrive with a perspective, a worldview that they want to impose. And the system is pretty good at smoothing that out through debate and, if necessary, through voting. And the way it works is it starts with, there are 5 rounds, 4 rounds plus finals. And it starts with the first round when the first jury arrives. It's split into two juries. A jury of 5 sits and looks at all 96,000 images, which is amazing. I have to say it's my favourite part of the competition. It's absolutely brutal. It's really grueling because it is just relentless. You just really just bang through pictures every second. Frames coming up in front of them. And it's, to my mind, it's actually one of the most interesting parts of the process because you really see everything. You see what a photographer in China thought was interesting, and very often that many, obviously, this huge bulk of these pictures are never going to win a prize. But just to see that global view of what are people photographing, what is interesting to them in their countries, thinking about why they submitted it, and what was important, it's really inspiring, often shocking, often very, very moving to see what people have brought forward as meaningful subjects. And at this round, I think one of the most difficult things is not only just the volume of images, but is also the fact that the pictures are viewed without captions. And this is a subject of hot debate amongst the juries and amongst, of course, the executive of the World Press Photo all the time, is when to introduce captions, how to introduce captions. And I was most struck in 2004, one of the jurors made a comment, which I wrote down, saying, an emotional adjective is required in the picture. A caption is not required. And I think that's really right. And in the early days of doing this, I went through various mindsets about how important captions are, how they shape the interpretation of pictures. But essentially, I love the idea of an emotional adjective in the picture. And what that describes to me is the skill of the photographer. It's not necessarily to tell the whole story, which is just a pure visual image is very limiting. But to ask enough questions to provoke enough curiosity to keep the picture in the viewer's attention, I think is really what our job is. And to that regards, I come to the conclusion I'm very comfortable with lack of captions. It's something which people will continue to talk about, but it does really throw the emphasis on the photographers to plant enough questions, enough emotional content in their images, even if they're dealing with obscure subjects. And in those early rounds, I have to reassure you that if there is any ambiguity about what this picture is, if it's not understood, it looks a little crazy, the rule is to keep it in. And so as it goes through the competition, then as the question comes up again and again, then the captions will be made available. So it's a tough process, but I think it's fairly tough because it is about the greatest photography in the world. From there, it goes to the second round. So typically, out of the second round jury comes in as a new jury, a jury of 9, with the chair continuous across. And they'll come to face somewhere between 15,000 and 25,000 images. There's no rule, but it sort of swings around that kind of bracket. And it's then filtered through the second round, third round, fourth round, of course the finals. And it's interesting to note that no image wins without being seen a minimum of 5 times, usually many more. And it takes all the time it needs. The system is incredibly forgiving, but the sacrifice, the payment that the jury makes is that the longer they look at the pictures, the more time they spend doing it. And the days start at 10 hours of judging. I think that's maybe the shortest. I think the shortest day is actually 8 hours, but typically that's unusual. Typically it's 10 hours. In some of the days they run 16 hours, and on several occasions I've been in 20-hour days. I mean, it's just crazy what these guys put into it. And I vividly remember a couple of years ago where it was 2 o'clock in the morning. They were judging finals of a category, and they were down to the wire, and they looked at what was on the table, and the jury was unhappy with the selection they'd made. And they went back and reopened the round at 2 o'clock in the morning. Took another 2 hours to make sure they had absolutely nailed the best pictures. That jury didn't leave until 5:40 that morning, having started at 9 o'clock the morning before. There's an astonishing dedication to actually getting this right, doing the very, very best for the photographers. It's really quite powerful. And I hastened about, they finished at 5:40, got ourselves off to our hotel room, so nobody was in bed before 6, and the process started again at 10 o'clock the following day. And I should point out also that most of the jurors have day jobs, so which doesn't go away during this process. We are absolutely insulated from it during the actual judging process, but at the beginning and the end of the day, and every coffee break in between, one has to attend to emails, phone calls, and all the rest of it. It's, I have to say, as a tribute to the jury, it's just, it's astonishing when you see how much they put into making this really work. And the discussions are endless. Discussions go on in the judging room, over coffee, lunch, breakfast, dinner, everywhere. Food. They feed us incredibly well. That is the upside. Thank you very much. And the Premier Award itself gets a whole half day. So as the selections narrow and all the categories are judged and finished, when it comes to the Premier Award, it gets full-on attention from the 9 jurors for half a day, sometimes more. I have to say, it was a little deflating in 2006, and I'm going to name one name here, which is Evelyn Kunst, who used to work for the World Press Photo, was a veteran of the World Press Photo even. As we staggered out of this extraordinary process, barely able to walk or open our eyes anymore, I said, what took you 2 weeks? We knew that already. And I have to say, the World Press staff have a phenomenal second antennae to anticipate what the jury is coming through with. Every year I'm amazed at how astute the people working in the office are, not only about the pictures, but about the jury and how they're going to react to them. So it's always interesting little game I play with them is to find out what they're voting for themselves behind the scenes and what actually wins, and there's an astonishing similarity. So what am I left with at the end of that 6 years? I'm going to quote another juror, who I think says it all. It was an enriching experience, something I would recommend to anyone who's passionate about photojournalism and, obviously, food. But I'm also left with a big question about what's next. There are 3 big words that need to be answered. They are world, press, and photo. So, about the world, by the world, we hope. I would hope to see an expanded vocabulary of what we're addressing in the world as photojournalists, and all of us in our different careers. More puzzling is press. And here we are in 2009. What is press? What does that mean? that include blogs? This is a competition which is defined by being professional. The rules state you must be a professional photographer with credentials. What does that mean now? I think that's a really big question. Very hard to answer. And of course, what is a photograph? And in 2009, again I went to the dictionary. A photograph is a picture made using a camera in which an image is focused onto film and then made visible or permanent by chemical treatment. Well, on that basis, I saw very few photographs this year. And of course, there's new technology. As a technology-driven medium, we have to pay attention to this. And the fact that what now passes for a photograph is not a photograph. The fact that it looks like a photograph and what we're used to and all the standards and conventions that we attach to silver halides and dyes and processes of chemistry, it's gone. And the standards that we have to apply now are different. And we're at this very difficult moment of trying to reassess those standards. And of course, we're all aware of the debates around Photoshop and simulated darkroom techniques and all this kind of stuff. The conventions are not yet established. And for the world press, it's a particular challenge because in attempting not to set the standards but to reflect the standards, the competition is, of course, reflecting a very confused set of standards at this moment. It's a very, very interesting moment, a very challenging moment. And I look forward very much to seeing how the world press deals with this in the next few years. Good luck. And of course, I want to see very much how everyone in this room responds to it, and including myself, because one of the great things is relinquishing this post, because I've now taken this amazing job with VII, which is a blast and a privilege. I'm, of course, back in the world of photojournalism, and no longer an observer, but also a participant, and facing the very same challenges. And I have to say, at this point, very excited by what's to come. So that's the end of my...
observations and also sharing these hilarious photographs every now and then. But on a more serious note, I think also during the jury sessions, I think I thanked you already several times for, let's say, your contribution to World Press. But I think I speak on behalf of all the jury members who have been on the last 6 juries, and I'm definitely speaking on behalf of the whole staff of World Press and the board, that we are very, very grateful for, let's say, your generosity and the eloquent way you kind of guided all these kind of juries through the process. And within World Press, we were very, very pleased and honored actually to have you here. So once again, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you on behalf of all of us. And I really hope that you will stay in touch with us and remain, as I said in the beginning, a real ambassador to World Press and a great friend. Thank you very much.